Let's do the math that's music to my ears. 17 days of an administration, 32 cases, 8 temporary restraining orders, 2 preliminary injunctions. We're in 5 different courthouses about 5 different elements of Donald Trump's failed policies as federal judges, including those primarily in the District of Columbia, who have an axe to grind after watching Donald Trump pardon the Jan 6th criminals. Most of them were convicted criminals. And we cover it all in great granular detail, but in an informative way in one place. Legal AF, the podcast, Wednesday night, and this is the After Dark edition. Take a listen. That's why it's important to locate and situate these cases in the right courts. And so now let's talk about, I gave the scorecard, but then let's dive in.
Before, just can I say one more thing before, because you mentioned the Supreme Court, and when we're talking about being prescient, I just want to read from Justice Sotomayor's dissent in Trump versus the United States, because it really just talk about predicting exactly what's going to happen. And I want to give her credit for what she put in her dissent that people said was hysterical and was overblown and it's not going to happen. She said, and this is just a part of it, it said, the president of the United States is the most powerful person in the country and possibly the world. When he uses his official powers in any way under the majority's reasoning, he now will be insulated from criminal prosecution. Orders the Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, immune. Organizes a military coup to hold on to power, immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon, immune, 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 immune. Let the president violate the law. Let him exploit the trappings of his office for personal gain. Let him use his official power for evil ends. Because if he knew that he may one day face liability for breaking the law, he might not be as bold and fearless as we would like him to be. That is the majority's message today. Even if these nightmare scenarios never play out, and I pray they never do, the damage has been done. The relationship between the president and the people he serves has shifted irrevocably. In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. And then never in the history of our republic has a president had reason to believe that he would be immune from prosecution if he used the trappings of office to violate criminal law. Moving forward, however, all former presidents will be cloaked in such immunity if the occupant of that office misuses official power for personal gain. The criminal law that the rest of us must abide by will not provide a backstop. So with fear for our democracy, I dissent. And I mean, and everyone thought, oh, she's overblown. He's not going to do that. There's all these things in place. And in 15 days, what has he done? He has slashed and burned and tried to wreak havoc in the federal government. And so I just wanted to put that out there because I think those words were just so prescient.
Yeah, the context is necessary. The good news is we're talking about civil, not criminal at this point, and federal judges, including Biden appointees and Jan 6 judges in the District of Columbia. 15 out of the 32 cases are filed in the District of Columbia, which makes sense given the regulatory nature, the fact that these agencies and departments are based in DC. But that's not the only place, because if you're injured somewhere else, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, California, pardon me. If you're injured somewhere else, you can sue where you're injured. And so, but we're picking and choosing the right judges. Let me just give the stats, and then we'll get into the FBI case and the Elon Musk case, because I think that's the one that's getting everybody's blood pressure up and boiling. Birthright citizenship, Donald Trump's attempt by executive order to rip out the heart of the Constitution and the 14th Amendment, which gives citizenship at birth. By way of an executive order, has not only been temporarily restrained by Judge Coffenor 2 weeks ago in Seattle, federal judge, finding it was blatantly unconstitutional, but it's now, as of today, been preliminarily enjoined, which is one step higher in the injunction food chain, by a federal judge in Maryland, who used to be a federal public defender. Shout out to the public defenders out there. And she ruled on a preliminary injunction, meaning it's going to stay, and nationwide no less, that it is against 125 years of precedent, 250 years of American jurisprudence. There's no judge that's ever ruled that that was appropriate to read the 14th Amendment the way the Trump administration does, and she wasn't going to be the first. And she went further to say, she asked this is where the Department of Justice is losing all credibility, and you're only 15 days in. She asked the lawyer for the Department of Justice, Okay, cite for me one case. Cite for me one case that goes your way in your argument that the framers of the 14th Amendment didn't want to create a loophole so that quote unquote undocumented who were born here, your parents born here, wouldn't receive U.S. citizenship. Give me a case. You don't have a case, do you? And this is not going to be the first case. So that will now go up on appeal to, I think, the Fourth Circuit, which I think covers Maryland. And we're up and running here. There's going to be 150 preliminary injunctions before we're all said and done in the first couple of years. But this is the first one. The ceiling has been broken. Then we've got, so in birthright, temporary restraining order, and an injunction. In the federal funding, the freeze on federal funding that Donald Trump tried to unfreeze to try to avoid jurisdiction of the courts and was caught red-handed. Rhode Island, temporary restraining order in place by Judge McConnell. D.C., temporary restraining order in place by Judge Ali Khan. In the anything related to transgender, particularly a new decision last night by a Reagan appointee, Judge Lamperth in D.C., who said, no, you're not going to put transgender women in the male prison. I mean, we don't even have to. I could read for you out loud all the things that Judge Lamperth said, but the Trump administration agreed. That's the other thing. They have no credibility. They agreed of all the serious physical and emotional harm to putting a transgender woman in a male population prison. And the judge was like, well, this will make it easy. I find it cruel and unusual under the 8th Amendment on a temporary restraining order standard, and I am going to block your doing so. You are not to transfer anybody during that time. So that was a TRO. So when you add them up, we've got five TROs. 5 total, and 1 preliminary injunction.
Pope, explain to people the difference between a TRO and a preliminary injunction, and then what happens after the fact of a permanent injunction and there's different legal standards. Just explain that to people, because I think we throw these terms around and I don't know that everybody knows what they are. That's a very good point. And one more coming, by the way. So I think that'll be the 5th TRO. Judge Catelli in D.C., who's not a big fan of Donald Trump's, she has given the Department of Justice until later this evening. We just don't have it for when we're live to tell her why they're not going to agree to ban Elon Musk from accessing the Treasury Department servers for the Bureau of Financial Service, which is where our $5 trillion with a T of payments, entitlements, Medicare, Medicaid, welfare, food stamps, and everything else comes from. Why they're not going to agree to hold that and make her issue an injunction. They're going to come up with some crazy, insulting filing that one of us will cover tomorrow, and the judge is going to end up issuing a temporary restraining order on that. In the beginning of a case, there's really 3 types of restraining orders or injunctions that a judge will handle progressively. At the very, very beginning of the case, before he even has full briefing, the law, the evidence, the facts, an evidentiary hearing, or anything like that, you can run in and sometimes convince a judge to put an administrative pin in things. It's called an administrative restraining order or injunction. It's the lowest level, and it's for hours or days until the judge gets full briefing and pulls everybody in for a temporary restraining order, which is next up on the food chain. Once you get, and that's really done without a lot of elements. It's the judge's inherent authority to go, yeah, you know what? I need about 3 or 4 days. You guys, status quo. It goes back to before this order came in, and I'll see you guys on Monday. It's a version of that. Then the temporary restraining order briefing schedule is set. The temporary restraining order and the preliminary injunction are very similar, except one is temporary and one is permanent. The standards are about the same. You have to show 4 things for a temporary restraining order, and it's almost the same 4 things for a preliminary injunction. You have to show that you are likely to succeed on the merits of your case. The judge has to look under the hood, kind of peer there, think about what the case is at trial, and conclude after reading your briefing, your law, and looking at your evidence that you are likely to win a year from now, 2 years from now, 6 months from now at the final trial of this case, and enjoin the action that is being threatened. That's one. The other 3 standards are 2 kind of merged together. It's irreparable harm and an adequate remedy at law, which is like, I can't fix with money you getting killed in prison because you've been put in the wrong prison. It's like that. So it's irreparable harm and inadequate remedy law. There's no money that can fix this problem. If people lose their paychecks who are waiting on federal funding,
and they don't eat that night, or their babies don't eat that night, or they get evicted because they're living paycheck to paycheck, she can't fix that after the fact with a monetary sum. So that's why equity steps in to do justice through injunction. So that's the combination of those two. And the last one is public interest tips in your favor. You got the better argument about public policy or public interest than they do. So the judge,
it's a pretty like, so when you get an injunction, because we throw it around like, oh, we have an injunction, like it's just something you go on and it's like exactly. It's not like you're going and getting a ticket to get in line, and so we get an injunction.
Right.
It's a high standard.
Taxes deli.
Yeah, exactly. No, but it's not, it's like, oh, they ran to court and got a temporary injunction. It's not like that. It's hard. It's a hard thing to get. And
especially against the government.
Exactly. And so really what these judges, these lifetime appointed federal judges are, some of them are appointed by Republican presidents, are saying things like, there is a very strong likelihood you will succeed on the merits. This is meaning there is no law in your favor. This is not, what you're doing is wrong and lawless, and there's irreparable harm. It's a big deal that they're getting these injunctions.
And the judge has already decided on, let's say, a temporary restraining order in your favor. You'd rather be there than on the opposite side of that.
Exactly.
Now the judge will then set a full briefing schedule, more briefings similar as to what you just did, but you update it. And now you get a bigger, better record. Maybe there's some depositions, some sworn statements, you get some evidence. Maybe you hold an evidentiary hearing where the judge takes testimony from the Department of Justice or whatever department is up and running on that particular issue. From the plaintiffs, like pregnant women from other countries, full evidential record is established, and the judge says, yeah, I'm going to stay with my original ruling on the temporary restraining order. And now this injunction, like the one out of the birthright citizenship for Judge, it'll come to me in a minute, is preliminary until the end of the case. So
that's the Maryland one you're talking about.
Maryland, right. 6 months, 8 months, a year, whatever it is, it stays in place for that length of time. Now, I will tell you that in my 35 years, I figured this out. Once in my entire career, did I not, when I won the TRO, did I not also win the preliminary injunction? So if you win the preliminary injunction, you're about 80% home. You're going to get the preliminary injunction, especially against the Trump administration. So anything that you hear as TRO now is likely to be preliminary injunction. If we're doing our home game, is likely to be converted into a PI. Once it's a PI, that's when you can likely take your first appeal. So that's when we'll start seeing appeals coming off of preliminary injunctions. That stays in place unless the appellate court vacates it, or the United States Supreme Court thinks it's interesting. Some things the Supreme Court will find interesting. Some things the Supreme Court's like, nah, we're not touching that. And if they don't take the case and they don't touch it, then the ruling of the appellate court just below the Supreme Court is the ruling that will stay for that case for its duration. This is a nationwide injunction that she's issued. Some people might ask, well, what about Judge Kofodor's TRO? That stays in place too. He can enter his own nationwide preliminary. We can have 2 nationwide preliminary injunctions, and they'll both go up on appeals. Or, having seen this one, this is where the portfolio method of filing multiple cases in front of multiple judges on the same issues comes into play. These lawyers that are, whether it's Norm Eisen representing this party or attorneys general representing this party, they'll talk. They'll say, who's got the better case? Who's got the better judge? Where do we think the better path to success is? And they might dismiss one case and follow the track of another case. The other reason you file 5 or 6, there's literally 8 cases on birthright citizenship that's been filed. 8. New Jersey, Maryland, all different places. Because if you don't get a great ruling, you hope to split and balance it. At least I got 5 good ones and 3 bad ones. Skip the 3 bad ones. We'll focus on the 5 good ones. But here, I think with the Trump administration and their outlandish positions, I think it's just going to be win, 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 win. Will they hit a Trump judge eventually in one of these places? Sure, they exist. And we'll report on it. But so preliminary injunction stays in place, and then at the end of a trial, the judge can say, "Yep, I was right. TRO, I was right. Preliminary injunction, I was right, and I'm right." Permanent injunction, meaning this is it, man. I've declared you unconstitutional in violation of law, in violation of, and then fill in the blanks. 14th Amendment, Administrative Procedures Act, First Amendment, all the rest. Boom, permanent injunction, and you can appeal that as well. But if I'll tell you straight, if you lose on the preliminary injunction matter, you're about 3/4 cooked at that point.
Yeah. It's so interesting because when you think about it, there was this when the big nationwide injunction that went in the opposite direction during the Biden administration was the Judge Kaczmarek with the mifepristone. If you remember, the MAGA people picked that judge, hand-selected that judge, and went to a place that there was no chance of getting another judge. He's the only judge who sits in that location in Texas, and got this nationwide injunction on mifepristone. What's interesting is now it's happening in the opposite direction, because now our side of things, democracy side, if you will, is in the plaintiff's driving seat. So you can bring the case, you can choose where to bring the case, and you bring the case where you think you will have the most likelihood of success, where you're not going to hopefully get a Trump judge, et cetera. So in some ways, we're in a better position now than before, because we're on the offensive, not the defensive, even though we're in a terrible place because we don't want to be in this position at all. But given that fact, I do think judge-wise, hopefully this will be a little bit better than what we've seen before.
Welcome back. Legal AF, more than 5 years in the making. If you don't know why we call it Legal AF, now you do. It's every Wednesday and Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on the Midas Touch Network. And of course, we put clips as well over on Legal AF, the YouTube channel as well. If you like what you're watching there, come back for the full-length podcast. It's about an hour long on Wednesdays. I do it with Karen Friedman, Agnifilo. Saturdays with Ben Mysalis. And of course, if you want to get ad-free versions, you can get ad-free versions of Legal AF over on our Legal AF Patreon, legalaf.com or Patreon/legalaf.com. In any event, until my next Legal AF reporting, I'm Michael Popok. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories, the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.